After the disappointment of the Saturn port of the original House of the Dead, which played well despite looking horrific in all the wrong ways, the concept of having Sega's premier zombie blasting series in the home looking arcade perfect seemed impossible. But the arrival of the sequel on the Dreamcast came as something as a shock to me. There'd been little to no coverage of its arcade release just a few months before, and lo, when I picked up my import Japanese Dreamcast in March of 1999, there it was. Buying it with my console was an absolute no-brainer at the time, but did it right all the wrongs of the first game? It's funny, the House of the Dead and Resident Evil share some DNA. They both started in mansions, they both brought back the undead vis-a-vis some mad science gone wrong, they both saw debuts in 1996 and sequels in 1998, which swapped the mansion for a city-wide outbreak, and then swapped the player characters too. Now for a light gun shooter like House of the Dead, the move to a city yields immediate benefits. We have larger set pieces, more stages, and an all-round larger playground to gun down the dead. The game takes place in a Venice-inspired city, which sees it rich with canals and beautiful Gothic infrastructure. And this is incredibly realised on the Dreamcast hardware. The visuals are astounding for a 1999 game. The environments are incredibly detailed, and the game moves at a solid 60 frames per second, and the shuffling monsters are very well realised. There are some drawbacks though, which I'll get into a little bit later. Similarly, the sound design is excellent. The music is fantastic, with a range of haunting, jazzy tunes that are either brand new or remixed from the original House of the Dead. Gun sounds are excellent, as are the grunts, groans and assorted bodily noises as you maim the undead. It's brilliant stuff. It's not all thriller though, the voice acting is atrocious, comically so, and part of me wonders whether this was intentional to really embrace the B-movie feel of the game. So if you're into Mystery Science Theater 3000, you may enjoy it. Gameplay then, it won't surprise you to hear that House of the Dead is outstanding. The feeling of blasting zombies apart bit by bit is incredibly satisfying, and at a full 60 frames per second, instantly gratifying. As with the first game, there are monsters to shoot and people to save, and saving enough civilians earns you a bonus at the end of the stage. It also serves as a way to navigate the alternative paths that the game allows you to explore. And that's not the only way to access hidden areas. There are keys and locks to shoot, and all manner of other on-screen elements that allow you to find the optimal path for a stage. The game can be tough, but it's fair, and like the best in the genre, it rewards repeat play, allowing you to memorise enemy attack patterns and find the best route for you. This all leads to a stingy ranking system, not only encouraging you to beat the game, but beat it quickly and beat it with the highest score and rank. Aside from arcade mode, there's a few other options, with original mode giving different challenges and buffs by the way of alternative character profiles. There's a boss rush mode too, and a practice mode rounding things out. And of course, it can all be played in 2-player. Now ideally you want a light gun, and while looking a little goofy, the Dreamcast gun is fantastic to use. Unfortunately, it was never released stateside, so you have to contend with some cheap third-party options. Worse still, not many games use the gun, so it's quite an outlay, especially for 2 players, for just a handful of games. And of course, the light gun is not an option for those with a modern display. However, the game still plays great with a controller, so it's definitely a worthwhile option for avid zombie blasters. Now many hold up House of the Dead 2 as one of the best light gun games ever, and generally I'd agree. However, with a summit populated by Virtua Cop 1 and 2 and the original House of the Dead, I can't quite hold House of the Dead 2 in the same regard. Despite the graphical step up in both arcade and home console sense, there are issues which mean I rate this sequel lower than the original. Though mostly outstanding, there are a few visual blemishes, such as some muddy textures here and there, but the most egregious thing is the human characters. They look like character models from a previous generation, and they move even worse. Sure, they're small visual issues for a great looking game, but they really pull you out of the setting. Combine that with the atrocious voice acting, and you have a setting that feels nothing like the original game's mansion. Yes, the first House of the Dead also had hammy acting, but it worked. Dr. Curian was a caricature, but in the context of the game, it worked and he still had an aura of menace about him. Goldman on the other hand is just silly, barely offering a coherent line of dialogue. And this is further impacted by some very samey environments. The original House of the Dead had some wonderful level design, with each stage feeling distinct. The House of the Dead 2 meanwhile has stages that are barely distinguishable from the last, in a sea of brown colours that would make Gears of War blush. These criticisms may sound harsh, and to be honest they are. The House of the Dead 2 is an exceptional light gun game, and its arrival on the Dreamcast was transformative, given the extremely flawed Saturn port of the original just a year before. It's a perfect port of a sequel that doesn't quite capture the magic of the near perfect Model 2 original, but boy, does it come close.
It's almost Halloween, and what better way to mark the occasion than with a review of one of the Dreamcast's best horror-themed arcade ports. That's right, it's House of the Dead 2, developed by AM1 and released on the Sega NAOMI board in Japanese arcades in November 1998. As with all NAOMI ports, the turnaround time between its arcade and Dreamcast release was swift, appearing on Japanese store shelves a mere 4 months later. Visually, the game is a stunner. The scenery in each level is rich in detail with destructible objects scattered on every corner. The zombies and monsters in the game are brilliantly animated and unique in their own way. They snarl and shuffle their way towards you menacingly, some changing pace as they get closer, with zombified animals also making an appearance in the form of bats and owls. When played with the official Dreamcast light gun, it's a true arcade experience in the home, especially if played on a large rear projection TV. The sound is solid, and when using the jump pack in your light gun or even the standard Dreamcast controller, each shot fired feels responsive and impactful as zombie parts fly across the screen. The game starts with green blood by default, but if you complete the game with the default difficulty, the option to change blood from green to red is unlocked. You need to earn it. There's no Abacab gore code here.
Get over here!
However, we've got to acknowledge the voice acting. It's hilariously cheesy, and in my opinion, it's totally on purpose. Now, I know voice acting has come a long way since the late 90s and early 2000s, but given the setting of House of the Dead 2, I feel they've been this awkward and cheesy on purpose, and that's why it works so well. It nails that horror B-movie feel perfectly, so much so that you'll probably chuckle along at some of the lines.
What the?
I posted a clip from the game on X earlier this week where some poor sod gets killed after being booted up the backside by a zombie, and Retro Martin replied saying the line that cracks him up the most in the game is, "Geez, bloodstains." You know, after you come across a random puddle of blood on the street that could belong to absolutely anybody given that it's a zombie apocalypse. Gameplay wise though, it's just a lot of fun. The game is short, but what light gun shooter isn't? And the game does feature branching paths at various points in each level, triggered by your success or failure in key situations throughout the level, such as saving, or not in this case, people in distress. One thing that can't be ignored, however, is how huge a leap visually House of the Dead 2 is from its predecessor, especially in regards to the home ports. When you consider the timeline, the highly compromised but still great to play Saturn port of the first game hit stores in early 1998 in both Japan and the West. But less than a year later, in March 1999, the sequel was on Dreamcasts across Japan and would form part of the US launch on 9/9/99. Is it the largest visual leap in console gaming in the shortest period of time? It certainly has a good shout, but if you can think of a better one, give it a mention in the comments. I had to take several factors into account when scoring House of the Dead 2 in 2023. The main one being that light gun games on retro consoles just aren't as accessible these days given the advancements in TV technology. Sure, if you've still got a CRT, it's not an issue, but being limited to a controller, as fun as the game still is with one, it makes this one an enjoyable, albeit compromised experience.